Welcome to a new Earth, awakening to your life's purpose. A worldwide web
So the very
event.
thing that would have made you react now makes you more present.
Makes you more present. Also, you talk about the deep lake effect. Would you describe that?
Yes, so the lake, if you imagine a vast lake, the surface of the lake changes all the time according to the weather, according to the wind. Sometimes it's rough, sometimes it's very still. But even when it's rough, if you imagine you are the lake and whatever happens in your life, the external situations of your life are the surface of the lake. External situations change continuously. Sometimes it's rough, sometimes it's fine, it's very still. But no matter, even if they are rough, the surface, the depth of the lake remains always undisturbed. And you are the lake in its depth. So your external life is the surface of things, surface reality.
Your ego.
Ego for the world of form, and included in the surface reality is even all your thoughts.
Right.
Because what we're talking about as the inner depths is deeper than your thoughts and your emotions.
And your presence is the bottom of the lake, is the full lake.
Yes. And it's wonderful when you begin to realize that your inner state is no longer dependent on and determined by
what's going on the surface.
Yes.
Got it. Got it.
And that's incredible freedom. That's true freedom.
Yes.
You can arrive at that place even if you are in a prison cell. And I've had letters from prison where people have written to me and said, we are free. I am free. I have found that place where my inner state is no longer dependent on what's happening outside. Of course, the prisoner would still prefer to be outside. On that level, fine. But
that's right.
Deep down, there is freedom from external conditions.
Because you are connected to the beingness of yourself.
Yes.
The consciousness of yourself.
Yes.
And you can use the word being, you can use the word consciousness, you can use the word, a lot of people use the word soul.
Yes.
Or inner being.
Yes.
Higher self. The word doesn't matter.
No.
The word doesn't matter. Thank you, Shireen, and everybody at Borders.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very alert. So let's get into this chapter. You say that we can assume that the ego is at play whenever we feel superior or inferior to anyone else. Now, I know this is true. When you see the person who's the biggest jerk out there, you know, people who act with such a sense of superiority and arrogance, I know that that is because they are really feeling inferior.
Yes.
But still hard to deal with.
Yes.
But what surprised me is that you say that often people who are also shy are also acting out of their egos. And you say whenever you feel superior or inferior to anyone, that's the ego in you. Why is that?
Well, if you're shy, then what you fear is to be found wanting, but so you dare not.
The fear is that the attention may take the form of disapproval or criticism.
Yes, you're afraid of that. So because you're afraid of that, whatever the disapproval or the criticism would represent an injury of your mentally mind-made sense of self, which is the ego. So the image that I have of myself as a capable person or whatever it is that I'm trying to uphold, if I encounter criticism, the ego immediately will be hurt. And so a shy person would not dare say anything because they're afraid of ego loss.
They're afraid of ego loss. Got it.
And so, because sometimes that's mistaken for an egoless person, a person who's very meek.
Not.
It's not. And deep down inside the shy person, or a person who is suffering from this sense of inferiority, there's the desire, the unexpressed desire to be superior.
Wow.
And inside the person who acts superior, who seems to have a big, confident ego, there's always the hidden fear that he might be inferior. And his whole acting out is to compensate for that hidden fear of being inferior.
Okay, behind every positive self-concept is the hidden fear of not being good enough.
Yes.
Behind every negative self-concept is the hidden desire of being the greatest or better than others.
Yes.
And where does self-esteem fit into all of that? Where does real self-esteem, what would true self-esteem look like?
Well, first there is the ego self-esteem, which is really even if you have high ego self-esteem, as we've just seen, there's always hidden fear underneath it. It's always there to compensate for that fear that you feel of not being good enough, of perhaps failing. So you need to play a role of being big to compensate for the fear of failure that's deep down. So but that's usually the world calls that, the world would say he or she has high self-esteem, if the people who have big egos. But the world doesn't realize that that's not true self-esteem. True self-esteem goes much deeper. It's finding the source of power and aliveness deep inside. We talked about the lake. Realizing that within the depth of your being, there is that continuous source of intense aliveness and power, which is the stillness out of which everything comes, the potential, the unexpressed potential for all form is there within every human being. You just have to become still.
So true self-esteem is realizing that that sense of being, that presence is there.
It comes out of the stillness.
That it comes out of the stillness. And that presence in me is the same as the presence in all people.
Yes.
And when you recognize that and act from that space within yourself, that is when you have true self-esteem.
That's true self-esteem. And self-esteem then is no longer derived from the belief that you are better than somebody else.
And so you are not attached to the labels or the roles that you play. And you speak about the many various roles that everybody has.
Yes, and then you're no longer devastated by criticism or get very angry when you're criticized, as the ego does. The ego is either totally devastated when you get, or it gets very angry when it gets criticized, this self-image.
But, you know, there's a role that most, or most women in our society and all societies play, is that role of mother, which is which is more than just a role. I mean, it's real. It's not just a role.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we need to differentiate between the function that you need to fulfill in this world for a while.
Right.
So if you have a child, your function is to be the mother and to fulfill the function of being the mother, which of course is looking after the child, sometimes set limits, what the child is allowed to do and so on. That's all fine. Now, if you become too identified with your function, then the function turns into a role. And then you cannot let go of the role, and that gets stuck to you. And even when the child grows up, and especially becomes a teenager, you still behave as if your child were small, and you still try to control and try to protect when it's no longer appropriate.
I got it.
Because you're stuck with the role then. So sometimes when the children become adults, the adult children are still treated by their parents who are stuck in the role of parent.
They can't let go of the role.
Yes, so they believe unconsciously that they need to continue to protect and ultimately control what the child does.
Because you don't parent a child the same at every age.
No.
Absolutely.
Yeah.